My stepfather left me a key in his will with no explanation, and when I finally found what it unlocked, I understood why my mother remarried him. Roland died when I was 22, 3 years after I'd moved out and stopped returning his calls. He'd married my mom when I was 14, right after my real dad left us with nothing but debt and a foreclosed house. Roland seemed fine at first. Quiet, methodical, worked in IT. He never tried to replace my dad or force a relationship, just existed in our space, paid the bills, and left me alone. But I resented him anyway. He was there when my dad should have been. He fixed the things my dad had broken. He showed up to my high school graduation when my real father didn't bother. After his funeral, the lawyer handed me a small brass key with a handwritten note. For Devin, Storage Unit 247, Riverside Facility. The answer is here. Mom looked as confused as I felt. She'd gotten the house, his savings, everything else. Just this cryptic key for me. I ignored it for 2 months. Then curiosity won. The storage unit was small, maybe 10x10, packed with filing boxes, each one labeled with a year, starting the year Roland married my mom. I opened the first box and found folders, each one containing printed emails, bank statements, and legal documents, all about my father. I sat on the concrete floor and started reading. Roland had tracked everything, every offshore account my dad had hidden, every asset he'd transferred to his mistress, every cent he'd stolen from my mom before abandoning us. The files were meticulous, spreadsheets showing exactly how much my father had taken and where it went. But there was more. The next boxes contained evidence of Roland's work. He'd spent 3 years building a legal case, hired forensic accountants, consulted with lawyers, documented everything my father had done. Then, right before he got too sick to continue, he'd filed a massive lawsuit on my mother's behalf. Tucked in the final box was a letter dated 2 weeks before his death. Devin, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The lawsuit will be finalized in 6 months. Your mother will get back everything your father stole, plus damages. I never told her because I didn't want her to hope and then lose again if it failed. I'm telling you because you need to know, I didn't marry her to replace your father. I married her because she deserved someone who would fight for her, and you deserve to know that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and strategic. The key to the house is in envelope 3B. I bought it last year. It's in your name. You'll understand when you see the address. My hands shook as I found envelope 3B. The house was on Riverside Drive, the same street we'd lost when I was 13. Same neighborhood, same tree-lined street where I'd learned to ride my bike. I drove there immediately. It wasn't our old house, that had been torn down, but it was 3 doors down, freshly renovated, with a sold sign in the yard dated 2 months ago. I used the key. Inside, the house was empty except for one room. A bedroom, already furnished. My old bedroom furniture, the set my mom had sold when we lost everything. Roland must have tracked it down and bought it back piece by piece. On the dresser sat one more envelope. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were DNA test results. Multiple tests, all comparing samples from me to samples from Roland. We were a match. Roland was my biological father. The dates aligned. My mom had known him before she met my dad. The man who raised me for 13 years, who I'd called father, who'd abandoned us, he'd known all along I wasn't his. That's why he'd left so easily. That's why he'd stolen everything. That's why Roland had come back into our lives, not as a stepfather, as my real father, fixing what he'd let another man destroy. I stood in that empty house, holding proof that my entire life had been built on a lie, and realized I didn't know which truth was worse, that the man I'd hated had been protecting me all along, or that my mother had carried this secret for 22 years. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. You found it. Now we need to talk about what your mother still doesn't know. Meet me at the address below. Come alone. Trust me like you should have trusted him. The address was a coffee shop downtown. The kind with exposed brick and baristas who took 15 minutes to make a latte. I sat in the back corner, DNA results folded in my jacket pocket, watching the door. A woman walked in, mid-50s, sharp gray suit, the kind of confident stride that said she'd spent decades in courtrooms. She spotted me immediately and headed straight for my table. Devin, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. I'm Patricia Hendricks. I was Roland's lawyer. You sent the text. I did. She set a leather briefcase on the table. Roland left very specific instructions about when I could contact you. The day you found the storage unit would trigger an alert on the facility system. I've been waiting to tell me what. Patricia's expression softened. To finish what Roland started. She opened the briefcase and pulled out another folder. This one was thicker than all the others combined. Your mother doesn't know you're Roland's biological child, she began. But that's not the only thing she doesn't know. My stomach twisted. Roland didn't just track down your father's stolen assets. He found something else, something that changes everything. She pushed a photograph across the table. It showed my father, the man who'd raised me, standing with 2 other children, a boy and a girl, both teenagers. Behind them stood a woman I'd never seen before. Your father had another family, Patricia said quietly, in Oregon. He'd been living a double life for 15 years. I couldn't breathe. These are your half-siblings, Caleb and Whitney. They're 19 and 17 now. Their mother Dana thought your father was a traveling salesman. She had no idea about you or your mom. How did Roland find this? He was thorough. When he started investigating your father's finances, he noticed regular transfers to an address in Portland, so he dug deeper. She pulled out more documents. Your father wasn't just stealing from your mother, he was stealing from Dana too, playing both families against each other, draining both households. I stared at the photograph. The kids looked happy, normal. like I used to look in old family photos before everything fell apart. When did Roland find out he was my biological father? Patricia hesitated. He always knew. The words hit like a physical blow. Your mother and Roland dated in college. They were engaged, actually. But Roland got a job offer overseas, 2 years in Singapore. He asked your mother to come with him. She wasn't ready to leave her family, her life. They broke up. And then? Then your mother met the man you call your father, Clayton Walsh. He was charming, successful, everything she thought she wanted. They got married quickly. Too quickly for her to realize she was already pregnant. She didn't know? Not at first. By the time she figured out the timing, she'd already told Clayton she was pregnant. He was thrilled. Started planning, buying baby furniture. She couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth, so she didn't. I felt sick. Roland came back from Singapore 8 months later. Your mother told him everything. He wanted to be in your life, but your mother was terrified. Clayton had a temper she hadn't seen before they married. She begged Roland to stay away, to let her handle it. So he just left? He moved to the West Coast, checked in periodically through mutual friends, sent money anonymously when he could. But he honored your mother's wishes. Patricia pulled out another document. This one looked official, legal. Everything changed when Clayton left. Your mother called Roland, desperate. The house was being foreclosed, there was no money, Clayton had vanished. Roland dropped everything and came back. But he couldn't tell your mother that he'd been tracking Clayton for years, that he'd known about the other family, that he'd been building a case. Why not? Because he was protecting her. And you. Patricia leaned forward. Clayton Walsh wasn't just a cheater and a thief. He was dangerous. He had connections to people who made problems disappear. Roland knew that if Clayton found out he was investigating, both you and your mother could be at risk. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too crowded. So he came back as the quiet IT guy, married your mother, played the role of the boring stepfather you resented, all while secretly dismantling Clayton's entire operation. What operation? Patricia's face darkened. Clayton wasn't a businessman. He was a con artist, a professional one. He targeted women, married them, drained their assets, then disappeared. You and your mother were his third family. Dana in Portland was his fourth. Roland found evidence of at least 6 other women over 20 years. I thought I might throw up. The lawsuit Roland filed isn't just about your mother's money. It's a federal case. Fraud, embezzlement, identity theft across state lines. The FBI has been building their case for 2 years based on Roland's research. The FBI? Roland didn't just hire forensic accountants. He went straight to federal authorities, gave them everything. They've been tracking Clayton ever since. Where is he now? Patricia smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. That's why I needed to meet with you. They arrested him last week, in Montana, with family number 7. He's being charged with 15 counts of federal fraud, 8 counts of identity theft, and multiple counts of domestic financial abuse. The room spun. Your testimony could seal the case. You're the only child old enough to testify about the pattern of behavior, how he isolated your mother, how he controlled the finances, how he disappeared. Mom doesn't know any of this? Roland made me promise to tell you first. He wanted you to decide how and when to tell her. About Clayton's arrest, about the other families, about everything. I sat back, trying to process it all. There's one more thing. Patricia pulled out a final envelope. The house Roland bought you? It's not the only property. He invested carefully over the years. The money from the lawsuit, your mother's share, will be substantial. But Roland set up separate trusts. One for you, one for Caleb and Whitney, one for each of Clayton's other victims. He helped all of them? He tried to. Some didn't want to be found. Some refused to believe their husband had other families. But the ones who listened, who helped him build the case, he made sure they'd be taken care of. I looked at the photograph of my half-siblings again. They had no idea their entire life was about to implode. Dana knows about the arrest, Patricia said, reading my mind. I flew to Portland last month and told her myself. She's devastated, but she's strong. The kids are having a harder time. Do they know about me? Not yet. That's something you'd need to decide together. Whether you want to meet, whether you want any kind of relationship. I folded the photo and tucked it in my pocket next to the DNA results. What happens next? That depends on you. The trial starts in 3 months. The prosecutor wants you on the stand. Your testimony about how Clayton left, what he said, how it affected your mother. It establishes a pattern, makes it harder for him to claim the other women are lying. And if I say no, Patricia's expression softened. Then you say no. Roland's evidence is strong enough to convict without you, but your testimony would make it airtight. He'd never hurt another family. I thought about Mom, how she'd believed in Clayton, how she'd blamed herself when he left, how she'd spent years thinking she'd done something wrong, how she'd carried the secret about Roland for my entire life. I need to talk to my mother first. Patricia nodded and stood. Take all the time you need. My number's in the file. When you're ready, call me. She paused at the door. Roland wanted you to know something. He said he never regretted staying away those first 13 years because he knew Clayton might retaliate if he didn't. But he regretted every day that you thought he was just some random guy who married your mom. He wanted you to know him, to really know him. After she left, I sat there for an hour, staring at the folders spread across the table. My father wasn't my father. My stepfather was my father. My father was a con artist who destroyed multiple families. My real father had spent years protecting me from a distance, then gave up everything to come back and fix what he could. I drove to Mom's house. Our house, technically. The one Roland had bought. The one she still lived in, alone, grieving the quiet man she'd loved. She opened the door and knew immediately something was wrong. Devin, what happened? I walked past her into the living room and set the folders on the coffee table. We need to talk. About Roland. About Clayton. About all of it. Her face went white. What did you find? Everything. I showed her the DNA results first. She didn't cry. didn't gasp, just stared at the paper like she'd been waiting for this moment for 22 years. You knew, I said. I suspected. After Roland came back. The way he looked at you. The way he tried so hard not to push, not to overstep. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I wanted to tell you so many times. But Roland said no. He said you needed to hate someone. And better it be him than Clayton. Better you think your real father was a deadbeat than know the truth. Which is? That I was a coward. That I chose safety over honesty. That I let you spend your whole childhood thinking you'd been abandoned by your real father when he was right there, waiting for any crumb of affection you'd give him. Her voice cracked. He loved you so much, Devin. Every parent-teacher conference I went to, he'd ask me to take notes so he could hear everything about you. Every award, every achievement. He kept them all in a box in his office. I found it after he died. I pulled out the photograph of Caleb and Whitney. Did you know about them? She stared at the image. No. Oh God, no. There are more. 6 families, maybe more. Clayton was a professional. He did this for a living. I spread out all of Patricia's documents, explained everything. The FBI investigation, the arrest, the trial. Mom sat frozen, processing. All those years, she whispered. I thought it was my fault, that I'd driven him away, that I wasn't enough. You were his victim. They all were. And Roland knew? This whole time? He was building a case, protecting you, protecting me. She picked up the photograph of Caleb and Whitney again. These kids, they're your siblings, half-siblings. They're family. She said it with certainty. They didn't ask for this either. I pulled out Patricia's card. The lawyer wants me to testify. At Clayton's trial, Mom looked at me, and I saw something shift in her expression. The guilt, the shame, all of it hardening into something else. Rage. Good, she said. I want to testify too. 3 months later, I stood outside the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago. Mom stood next to me, wearing a navy suit Roland had bought her for their anniversary. She'd never worn it. Said it was too nice for every day. Today was special. Patricia met us at the entrance. Ready? I nodded. Mom squeezed my hand. Inside, the courtroom was packed. I recognized Dana from Portland, looking small and scared in the front row. A few other women I didn't know sat scattered throughout, Clayton's other victims. Then I saw them. Caleb and Whitney, sitting behind Dana. Caleb was tall, athletic, with Clayton's dark hair. Whitney was petite, blonde, looked like Dana. They both looked terrified. I'd spoken to them twice on the phone since finding out they existed. Awkward conversations where we tried to figure out what to call each other, how to feel about this bizarre connection we shared. Whitney had cried, said she felt like her whole life was a lie. I told her I understood. Caleb had been angry, wanted to know why no one had caught Clayton sooner, why Roland hadn't stopped him before he destroyed more families. I didn't have a good answer, just told him Roland did what he could. Now, seeing them in person for the first time, I felt a strange pull. They looked like strangers, but I knew their story, knew their pain, because it was my pain too. Clayton was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit. His hair had thinned. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. He scanned the courtroom and his eyes landed on me. For a second, something flickered across his face. Surprise? Recognition? Then he looked away like I was nothing, like I'd always been nothing. The prosecution built their case methodically. Financial records showing Clayton's pattern of behavior over 2 decades. Testimonies from forensic accountants. FBI agents explaining how they'd tracked his movements across 7 states. Then came the victims. Dana went first. She described how Clayton had swept her off her feet, how he'd promised her the world, how he'd slowly isolated her from friends and family, how the money had started disappearing, how she'd believed his lies until the FBI showed up at her door. 3 other women testified. Similar stories, same pattern, different cities. Clayton's lawyer tried to paint them as vindictive ex-wives, bitter women looking for someone to blame for their own financial mistakes. The jury wasn't buying it. On day 3, they called me to the stand. I swore in and sat down, avoiding Clayton's eyes. The prosecutor was a woman named Vivian Torres. She told me she'd built her career prosecuting white-collar criminals who targeted women. Devin, she began gently, can you describe your relationship with the defendant, Clayton Walsh? He was my father. At least I thought he was. For the first 13 years of my life. When did he leave your family? The day after my 13th birthday. I came home from school and all his stuff was gone. So was most of my mother's jewelry. And our savings. Did he say goodbye? No. He left a note saying he had to leave for work. That he'd be back soon. I paused. He never came back. How did this affect your family financially? I detailed everything. The foreclosure, the debt collectors, Mom working 3 jobs, how we'd lived in a tiny apartment with no heat that first winter. And your mother's current husband, Roland. When did he enter your life? About a year later. He married my mom when I was 14. Did you know at the time that Roland was investigating Clayton's activities? No. I thought he was just some guy who felt sorry for us. Vivian nodded. No further questions. Clayton's lawyer stood. He was a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. Devin, isn't it true that you resented Roland? That you refused to accept him as a father figure? Yes. Isn't it possible that your negative feelings toward Roland have colored your testimony today? That you're trying to defend him posthumously by painting my client as a villain? I stared at the lawyer, then at Clayton, then back. Roland didn't need me to defend him. He spent years documenting everything your client did. He built an airtight case because he knew Clayton was dangerous. And he was right. But you can't actually testify to my client's intent, can you? You were a child when he left. You don't know why he left or what he was thinking. I know he stole from us. I know he had other families. I know he left my mother with nothing while he went on to destroy other lives. My voice was steady. And I know Roland spent his last years trying to fix what Clayton broke. That's not opinion. That's fact. The lawyer tried a few more angles, but I didn't budge. Mom testified next. She was calmer than I expected, methodical. She walked through every detail of their relationship, every red flag she'd ignored, every lie she'd believed. When Clayton's lawyer tried to suggest she was a willing participant in his financial schemes, she cut him off. I was a victim. So were my children. So were all these women. She gestured to the other families in the courtroom. Your client is a predator who spent decades perfecting his craft. And thanks to Roland's work, he's finally being held accountable. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Clayton was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. As they led him away, he looked back one more time, found me in the crowd. I didn't look away, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch, just stared until he was gone. After the sentencing, Patricia hosted a gathering at her office. All of Clayton's victims were there, plus their families. It was strange, standing in a room full of people connected only by the man who destroyed their lives. Dana approached me first, Whitney and Caleb trailing behind her. Thank you, she said quietly, for testifying, for being brave. You were brave too. She introduced me to the kids properly. Up close, I could see Whitney had Clayton's eyes, that same sharp green that used to make me feel safe when I was little. Now they just reminded me of everything he'd taken. This is weird, Whitney said bluntly. I laughed. Yeah, it really is. Do we hug or something? Caleb asked. I don't know the protocol for meeting secret half-siblings. We stood there awkwardly until Whitney broke first, wrapping her arms around me. I'm glad you exist, she whispered. I thought we were the only ones. Caleb joined the hug. Our therapist says we should be grateful we found each other. That most kids in situations like this never connect. Your therapist is probably right. We spent the next hour trading stories, finding the overlaps in Clayton's lies, the patterns in his behavior, how he'd told each family the same stories with minor variations, how he'd used the same excuses to explain his absences, how he'd made each of us feel special, chosen, like we were the center of his world, until we weren't. Mom spent time talking to Dana and the other women. I watched them from across the room, saw the way they held each other's hands, shared tissues when the tears came. They were building something together, a support system born from shared trauma. Patricia found me by the window, looking out at the city lights. Roland would be proud, she said. I wish I'd known. When he was alive, I wish I'd told him I understood. He knew. Trust me, he knew. She handed me an envelope. Another one. What's this? The final piece. Roland left specific instructions that you'd only get this after the trial concluded. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter in Roland's handwriting. Devin, if you're reading this, then justice has been served. Clayton is paying for what he did, and you found the truth about our connection. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. Your mother and I agreed it was safest this way, but I need you to know something. Every day I got to spend in your life, even as the boring stepfather you resented, was a gift. You are the best thing I ever helped create, and I have never regretted a single choice I made to protect you. The houses I bought, the money I set aside, the case I built, none of it matters compared to knowing you're safe. You're free. You're not defined by Clayton's lies or my absence, or the complexity of how you came into this world. You get to decide who you are. And whoever you become, I'm proud of you. I always have been. I always will be. Love, Dad. I read it 3 times before the tears finally came. Patricia squeezed my shoulder and walked away, giving me privacy. Mom found me a few minutes later. She read the letter over my shoulder and started crying too. He really loved you, she whispered. I know. I finally know. We stood there together, mourning the man who'd saved us in every way that mattered. 6 months later, I moved into the house on Riverside Drive. Mom helped me unpack, hanging pictures and arranging furniture. We kept my old bedroom set exactly as Roland had left it. Whitney and Caleb came to visit for a weekend. We were still figuring out how to be siblings, but it was getting easier, less awkward. Whitney had started college, studying psychology, said she wanted to help other kids from fractured families. Caleb was taking a gap year, working through his anger in therapy. We ordered pizza and stayed up late sharing memories. Not about Clayton, about our mothers, about the lives we'd built despite him. I keep thinking about what Dana said, Whitney mentioned, picking pepperoni off her slice, about how Roland spent years protecting all of us. Not just your family. What do you mean? The FBI said Roland's evidence helped them build cases against 2 other con artists using similar tactics. That his documentation set a precedent for how to track these kinds of predators. Caleb nodded. He basically created a playbook for catching people like Clayton. The FBI's using his methods to train agents now. I'd known Roland's work was thorough, but I hadn't realized the scope. He changed the system, Whitney said quietly. Not just for us, for everyone. Mom appeared in the doorway, holding a photo album I'd never seen before. I found this in the storage unit, she said. In one of the boxes you didn't open, inside were pictures of Roland, but not the Roland I knew. These photos showed a younger man, smiling, laughing, full of life. Pictures of him with my mom in college, pictures of him holding a baby, holding me. When? I asked, my voice breaking. He took personal leave when you were born, flew back from Singapore for a week, told his company it was a family emergency. Mom touched one of the photos gently. He was there. For 5 days he was there. Then he had to leave again, go back to his job, let Clayton play father. There were dozens of pictures. Roland feeding me a bottle, Roland changing my diaper, Roland asleep in a chair with me on his chest. He made me promise not to tell Clayton. Said it would be easier if Clayton believed you were completely his, but he needed to meet you, to hold you, even if it was just once. I traced the outline of Roland's face in the photograph, the way he looked at baby me with such pure love. I wasted so much time hating him. You didn't waste anything, Mom said firmly. You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how. He understood that. He never blamed you. Caleb was staring at the photos with an expression I couldn't quite read. What? I asked. I'm jealous, he admitted. You got a do-over. Someone who came back and fixed things. We just got abandoned. Roland tried to help your family too, I reminded him. The trust fund he set up, I know, and I'm grateful. But it's not the same as having someone actually show up. He paused. I'm not blaming you. It's just complicated. Whitney put her hand on his arm. We're all messed up. That's okay. We spent the rest of the night looking through Roland's photos, building a picture of the man he'd been before he became my stepfather. A man who'd loved my mother enough to let her go, who'd loved me enough to come back, who'd loved justice enough to spend his final years fighting for it. The lawsuit settlements came through a year later. Mom's share was even larger than Patricia had estimated. Combined with Roland's life insurance and carefully managed investments, she'd never have to worry about money again. The trusts Roland set up for his victims distributed over $2 million total. Dana used her share to buy a house and fund both kids' college educations. The other women started businesses, paid off debts, rebuilt lives. My trust fund was designated for education and housing. I used part of it to finish my degree in social work. Roland had written a note with the trust paperwork. Help others find their way out. So I did. I started working with a nonprofit that specialized in financial abuse, helping people document evidence, build cases, escape dangerous situations. Twice a month, I volunteered at a legal clinic, using what I'd learned from Roland's files to teach others how to protect themselves. Clayton's case had created precedent. Prosecutors across the country were using Roland's documentation methods to build cases against other con artists. Whitney joined me at the clinic when she came to visit, said she wanted to learn the practical side of the psychology she was studying. Caleb started a podcast about financial crimes and family betrayal. It got surprisingly popular. He interviewed some of Clayton's other victims, sharing their stories with their permission. We were turning our trauma into something useful, making meaning from the wreckage. On what would have been Roland's 55th birthday, I drove out to his grave. I'd avoided it for months after the funeral, too angry at myself for wasting the time I'd had with him. But now I had things to say. I got the house, I started, sitting cross-legged on the grass. Moved in last year. Whitney and Caleb visit sometimes. Mom's doing better. She's taking classes, figuring out who she is outside of being someone's victim. I pulled out the DNA results, now creased and worn from being carried in my wallet. I keep these with me, as a reminder, not of Clayton's lies, but of your truth. You came back. You showed up. You did the hard, quiet work that no one saw. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead. I'm working at a nonprofit now, helping people escape situations like Mom's, like Dana's. We're using your methods, your documentation style. You created something that's helping people you'll never meet. I traced his name on the headstone. Roland Christopher Hayes. I wish I'd called you Dad, even once. I wish I'd told you I was grateful, that I saw you. My voice cracked. But if there's any chance you can hear this, I need you to know. You were my father in every way that mattered. Biology just made it official. I left flowers, bright yellow daisies, his favorite, and drove back to Riverside Drive. Mom was waiting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. How'd it go? She asked. Good. Hard, but good. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood kids ride bikes down the street. The same street where I'd learned to ride mine, a lifetime ago. I've been thinking, Mom said carefully, about the house, the original one we lost. What about it? It's back on the market. The developer who bought it went bankrupt. The new owners want to sell. I looked at her. Do you want to buy it back? Maybe. Not to live in, but as a symbol, that we survived, that we came back stronger. Roland would love that. He would. She smiled. We could turn it into something. A safe house maybe, for people fleeing financial abuse. A place where they can stay while they rebuild. I thought about it. About scared women showing up with nothing, just like Mom had after Clayton left. About giving them a place where they could breathe, plan, heal. Let's do it. We spent the next 6 months renovating the old house. Mom managed the project while I handled the nonprofit paperwork to make it official. We called it Hayes House. Not Clayton's name, not our name, Roland's name. The name of a man who'd spent his life fixing what others broke. On opening day, Dana drove in from Portland with the kids. Other victims from Clayton's trial showed up. Patricia came with her whole law firm, offering pro bono services to future residents. We stood in the front yard, the yard where I'd played as a kid before everything fell apart, and cut the ribbon together. To new beginnings, Mom said, her voice steady. To second chances, Dana added. To Roland, I finished. Who taught us that love isn't always loud? Sometimes it's patient, strategic, and builds a better world one document at a time. We let the first family move in that afternoon. A woman named Brielle with 3 kids, escaping a situation eerily similar to Mom's. She cried when she saw the house, said it felt like hope. That night, I sat in my old bedroom on Riverside Drive, looking through Roland's photos again. There was one I hadn't noticed before, tucked in the back of the album. Roland standing in front of the old house, the day Mom first showed it to him, before they bought it. Before Clayton destroyed everything, he was smiling, looking at something off camera. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in Roland's handwriting, first day of forever. This is where we start again. He'd known even then that he'd find a way back, that he'd fix what was broken, that he'd build something lasting. I texted Whitney and Caleb a photo of the picture. Whitney replied first. He was playing the long game from day one. Caleb, patient, strategic, and totally badass. We come from good stock, siblings. We finally stopped calling each other half because family isn't determined by percentages of shared DNA. It's built by showing up, by doing the hard work, by choosing each other despite the complicated circumstances that brought you together. Roland taught me that, not through grand gestures or emotional speeches, but through years of quiet, consistent love, the kind that leaves storage units full of evidence, the kind that tracks down stolen furniture and buys houses on childhood streets, the kind that fights for justice even when the person you're fighting for doesn't know you're their father. That's the kind of love that changes everything. And now I had a chance to pass it forward. 5 years later, Hayes House has helped 63 families escape financial abuse. Mom runs the place full-time now. Says it gives her purpose. She's become an expert on financial recovery, teaching workshops on how to rebuild credit and recognize red flags in relationships. Whitney finished her psychology degree and works part-time at the house as a counselor. She's specializing in family trauma therapy. Caleb's podcast turned into a consulting business. He helps organizations train employees to spot financial abuse patterns. Says Roland's documentation methods should be taught in business schools. I still work at the nonprofit, still teach people how to gather evidence, how to protect themselves, how to escape. And sometimes, when a scared woman sits across from me asking if there's any hope, I tell her about Roland, about a man who spent years playing the long game, who proved that love doesn't always look like what we expect, who showed me that being a hero doesn't require capes or loud declarations. Sometimes it just requires showing up, being patient, doing the meticulous, unglamorous work that no one sees until years later when it all comes together. Clayton is still in prison. He'll be eligible for parole when he's 74. His lawyer tried to appeal twice. Both times Roland's documentation held. The evidence doesn't lie. I haven't visited Clayton. Don't plan to. He's not worth my time or energy. But I think about him sometimes, about how he spent decades building houses of cards, taking, and how one quiet IT guy spent years building something unshakable, something that couldn't be stolen or destroyed. Legacy, not the kind you inherit, the kind you create through choices. I keep Roland's final letter framed in my office. Read it on hard days when I doubt whether any of this matters. You get to decide who you are. I decided to be someone who shows up, who does the work, who builds something lasting, just like my father taught me. Not the father who left, the father who came back and stayed.